Hey everybody, welcome back to Beeps Media. I'm your host, Nick Schaefer here. We're on episode 3. We've already done 2 desperate, failing, incompetent Chicago sports franchises in episodes 1 and 2. We started with the White Sox, we moved on to the Chicago Bears, and of course, it is the beginning of November. We got to move on to the Chicago Bulls, who may or may not fall into that category. I guess that's to be determined. I think it's a little more ambiguous than the White Sox and Bears, which isn't necessarily saying much, but I'm very happy to have uh, the preeminent Chicago Bulls expert, or at least one of them, who's been kind enough to grace us with his company today, just to chat Bulls, because I know you don't get enough of that, Ricky. So it's Ricky O'Donnell. Ricky, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Nick. I'm always down to chat about the Bulls. And unfortunately, as this season starts to go on, I just become more and more convinced that the Bulls are as hapless as the White Sox and the Bears.
Oh,
And,
no.
what a time, man. It's like, can we get one decent team in this city to root for? Me personally, I don't have one. So we'll see if the Bulls can end up being a team that is a non-embarrassment to the city. It should be a low bar to clear, but I'm not too optimistic through the first few games of the season.
I know. I feel like we had some moments as we as the city where it was like, the sky had that really, they burned real bright for a minute, and the Blackhawks were cool, and then it was revealed that they were very much not cool. So we shall see. Um, yeah. So like for disclosure on my end, like you know, basketball not being the primary sport I follow, I'm very eager to like learn from people who definitely know more than me. And I'm kind of happy to adopt the affect of like, listen, I don't really buy into tanking as a general matter. I don't believe in rings or bust unless you're like, maybe if you're the Boston Celtics, you're like rings or bust right now. So like I was kind of, it's like, hey, look, let's build a pretty good team, make it an attractive destination again. Maybe you can lure a superstar in a trade because that seems to be, or a signing, and that seems as viable a plan as tanking for the number 1 pick and praying you get a Wemby instead of a Cade. Like, so I was like willing to be optimistic. I thought they'd hit the over on their win total this year, which was in the high 30s. Liked the signing of Craig. I liked the signing of Carter. We're 5 games in. They're 2-3. Um, I guess I'd be curious to know where you were like right before the season started, and if these 5 games have changed your views at all.
Yeah, I was pretty optimistic heading into the season. I thought there was a case to be made that the Bulls could be a team due for, somewhat substantial improvement just by sort of tinkering around the margins of the roster. I thought, like, that case would probably start with the fact that the Bulls' point differential was that of about a 44 win team last year. They ended up winning 40 games. They went 40 and 42. And that was a team that had quite a bit of bad luck, both in clutch games and just in general around the margins of the roster. There was so much low hanging fruit, starting most obviously with the fact that the Bulls finished last in 3-point rate each of the last 2 years. So that's percentage of shots coming from 3-point range. The Bulls were just consistently outscored and outshot from behind the arc by their opponents all last year. So adding Javon Carter, I thought that he would give them a little bit more volume shooting from 3. I thought Torrey Craig was just a good signing in general to get him for the minimum. Like, typically, that's a guy who, if you're getting him for the minimum, he's going to a championship contender. Instead, he went to a team that is, the best case scenario is probably competing for the 6th seed. But he's been really good so far through the start of the season. I actually feel really good about both Carter and Craig and would like to see those guys play more. So I think when the Bulls made those decisions to basically keep Vucevic, Levine, DeRozan as the central tenants of the team, and then you had adding Carter and Craig, I thought maybe they could be a 45-46 win team, and I thought that given that the team tried to shop Levine in the offseason and just couldn't find a big enough package to actually pull the trigger on it, I thought it was a decent bet. And yeah, what I've seen just through the start of this season is like these guys just don't like playing with each other, and I think that that's a really bad sign. Like Mark Eversley and Arturas Karnisovas gave an interview with The Score maybe like a month before the season. And Mark Eversley, like 40 minutes into the interview, just dropped a really interesting soundbite when he said, last year we just didn't feel like a team. The guys just kind of showed up and went to work and went home, and there was no real camaraderie or chemistry among the group. And man, is that a damning statement to make about a team that you totally kept together? Like, when you see the Bulls take the floor this year and they're starting Kobe White and they're starting Patrick Williams and you still have Billy Donovan as the coach, it's like, dude, this is still the same team. We saw struggle last year. There's now no hope of Lonzo Ball coming back to
Mhm.
like save the operation. And it just seems like they took the laziest approach possible for a team that, in the best case scenario, still wasn't going to be that good. And that to me is one of the defining traits of a Jerry Reinsdorf team of like, if everything goes super right, well, it still won't be that good. And the only time that didn't happen was during the 2005 White Sox World Series, where like everything went right and it actually did have a championship World Series ceiling. And with the Bulls, even this team's best case scenario was going to be a team that was in the middle of the Eastern Conference playoff picture, probably wasn't getting home court advantage. And we could talk about the merits of that. I think like it's very cold in the Midwest. You're not going to go outside much. So just having a team that is like on TV 4 times a week and you can watch them without feeling shame is a decent enough goal, I guess. But the margin for error to hit that best case scenario is always going to be really slim. Of course, we're 5 games into the season. Perhaps the Bulls can still win 45 games and give us a team that is fun to watch. And I compare them to the Knicks a little bit because the Knicks fan base seems like one of the rare NBA fan bases that is like really happy with where their team is at. The Knicks have no chance to win the championship. Their best players Julius Randle or Jalen Brunson, and Randle was all NBA last year, 2 of the last 3 years, but you look at that team, they won 47 games. They won a playoff series that most people didn't think they would win. And in like the rings or bust culture of the NBA, I think like you look at the Knicks as a team that just has no chance to get the ring this year. But, the fan base is excited. I guess, the Knicks also have the benefit of having surplus draft picks, whereas the Bulls are in a draft pick deficit. So that gives you some hope that they could actually add a piece moving forward. Uh, but I was thinking, maybe the Bulls could be sort of similar to a team the Knicks were last year, and just be, a middle of the Eastern Conference playoff picture team, a team that's fun to watch, a team that's fun to root for. But I think what we overlooked is that these guys just don't like playing with each other that much. And given all the quotes that have come out from the team through training camp and through the start of this season, I do get the sense that everyone involved is just waiting to be traded, and everyone involved is waiting for it to end. I don't know
Oof.
if that's going to happen because with the Jerry Reinsdorf team, mediocrity is the goal. And will the Bulls be able to hit their low bar and, be a team that is a non-embarrassment? Well, they were the biggest embarrassment in the NBA after the first game of the season when they had a players-only meeting. So
That
I'd say
was so
we're already
weird.
off to a bad start in terms of not being an embarrassment. And yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it goes. But I'm pretty discouraged just to start the year through 5 games.
Yeah, I mean, like lots of chew on there too. I mean, thinking about the Knicks, and I guess that sort of goes back to my thing about context, right? With the rings or bust discussion, where if you're a Boston Celtics fan right now, you got to be, yeah, it's got to be rings or bust. We've been in the Eastern Conference Finals like 5, 6 years in a row. Like going to the Eastern Conference Finals again. While as a Bulls fan, I'd be thrilled. Celtics fan, like, yeah, okay, that's kind of holding serve. And the Knicks and Bulls are these two historic legacy franchises that in the 21st century have been absolute dog water with some very rare exceptions. So yeah, their fan bases are like so starved for any sort of success. And I don't know if this is sort of changing around the league with like places like Milwaukee and Golden State becoming, you know, elite franchises or whatever you want to call them. But like the traditional thinking used to be like if you're a big market team, like look at the Lakers. It doesn't matter how badly run they are, how much they suck, like they'll still just grab like some premier free agent's going to be interested in going there. That was the way it was for forever. And if you were the Knicks, like they always were thinking like, okay, if we can make this team not a joke, superstars are going to want to come here again. And you would think that about the Bulls, but like you said, Reinsdorf is just he aims low and he executes poorly. So it's really shocking. And I know a lot of people were like, oh, Billy Donovan's highest odds to get fired at Vegas or something like that, and first coach fired, and the over under was like 37.5, which, like, if you just looked at the team, you say they won 40 games last year, they won more than that the year before. On paper, they like should be better. They added veterans that make more sense, two-way players, guys who can shoot a bit to fill the Lonzo gap. And it's like, it feels really rare for Reinsdorf teams to do anything. They're always like, we'll wait till the offseason, we'll wait till the offseason. And then they never do anything in the offseason either. So it's like, yeah, I was skeptical of the fire sale, other than Levine, just because he makes so much money and Reinsdorf's so cheap. But I was interested to start to see these like personality issues, which it's hard to wrap your arms around, especially from the outside. So I always like try to look for more on the court things, more tangible things that like they don't shoot 3-pointers. Like, yeah, that's very easy for me to understand. Whereas it's like, so and so's body language is bad. I'm like, all right, well, people have thought I was upset when I wasn't. So, who knows? But I mean, do you think, like, I'm seeing more buzz about like Levine not liking the coaching staff? I know he got benched last year when he was like 1 for 30 or something in a game, and um, like I don't know. Is there anything? Do you, if you had to guess, do you think he actually gets dealt this year?
I think the worst thing the Bulls could do for the long-term hopes of the franchise is to make a bad Zach LaVine trade. Like, if they're going to trade him, I think absolutely trade him, because this team's going nowhere. But you got to get a good return for him. And given that the championship picture looks relatively wide open right now, I mean,
Yeah.
Boston is starting to look like a juggernaut. The Nuggets are going to be great. But, we've seen the Nuggets with an injury. They're very
Yeah.
vulnerable. Like, just even if KCP goes down, if Aaron Gordon goes down, Michael Porter Jr. is like almost a guarantee to go down at some point, given his injury history. I think that would make the Nuggets relatively vulnerable. And the Celtics are really banking a lot on Al Horford and on Kristaps Porzingis staying healthy. So there's certainly some risk in that. They don't have Robert Williams to fall back on in the front court anymore. So the idea that like a team like Philly could take the assets they got from the James Harden trade, add in another pick, I hope, and send all that to the Bulls for Zach LaVine, I think that would be good enough, really. Like, you can't look at the Rudy Gobert trade where Gobert fetched 5 first-rounders, or even like the DeJounte Murray trade where he got 3, and think, okay, this is like the standard for an NBA superstar trade anymore, because those are kind of just outliers, I think, in the big picture. So do I think Levine could get traded? I think, yeah, for sure, because Reinsdorf is cheap, because Levine is very good, but Levine is good as an off-ball scorer. And if your best player is an off-ball scorer, you're probably not going to be that good unless you have someone who could consistently get him the ball and put him in winning situations. And the Bulls don't have that without Lonzo. Billy Donovan does not seem capable of fine-tuning the offensive mix to engineer the best results. He's a very good defensive coach. How the
Yeah,
Bulls picked the number 5 defense last year
I wasn't
without
expecting
Lonzo
that.
is like, it's just witchcraft, really. Like, a team with DeMar DeRozan, Zach LaVine, and Nikola Vucevic all finishing in the top 11 of the NBA in minutes, total minutes.
Didn't
Those
know that.
guys played a ton of minutes last
Oh,
year for the Bulls, and they finished with the 5th best defense. How? I don't know. Alex Caruso's a monster. They got some luck in terms of teams missing shots. And honestly, Donovan's defenses are very good every single year. It has been since he's been in Oklahoma City. There's a long track record of that at this point. So I guess to get back to your question, do I think the Bulls could trade Levine? Yes. I don't really think they want to make an in-season move, though. Karnisovas has sprouted these like totally crazy ideas that like any move you make in season doesn't really change the team, and that
oh, right,
getting Patrick
right.
Beverly on the buyout market was like the best case scenario for an addition to be made in season. I'm like, just a loser mentality all the way around, and classic Reinsdorf employee. It's like Jerry's like telling him this word for word, and he's just repeating the job. So I don't know. I think like it really depends on, are the Bulls a huge embarrassment? And as a White Sox guy yourself, you know, during this season, this last White Sox season, I kept hearing people say, well, there's no way they're going to fire Hahn. There's no way they're going to fire Kenny. And as a White Sox fan, where baseball's not my primary sport, I really felt like, oh, they're going to fire these guys because this is so embarrassing. Like they just have to at a certain point. So Jerry definitely didn't want to fire them, but I think he felt his hands were tied because the season was so humiliating that he had no choice but to make a move. So will that happen with the Bulls? We'll see. I mean, it's not a terrible roster, 1 through 10.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, in the NBA, it's a 15-man roster, and the end of the Bulls roster is just a complete joke. But 1 through 10, it's a non-embarrassing roster. They should be in most games. Like they should be in the game most nights, and then it's kind of just like a coin flip's chance of whether or not they're going to win it. Is that
Mhm.
entertaining to watch? Maybe, maybe not. It's certainly an improvement from the Jim Boylan era where they were league-wide humiliation. Uh, so yeah, it really just like it's going to be interesting to see. Like, can they keep their head relatively above water to where they can convince themselves that keeping this thing together is the right move? But as the season goes on, I just wonder, what are they really playing for and what are they really building towards? And I wanted to get into this. Like you talked about championship or bust as a fan mindset. That is so rampant through the NBA, right? Like the season was a failure if you don't win the championship. But I think if you're a reasonable fan, what you want is to just be able to point to something where you've inched closer to a championship, even if you don't win it. Now, that could be something, the best case scenario would just be like advancing very far in the season, making it to the conference finals or the finals. And you could say, well, look, we really moved closer to the championship. But it could also be something smaller. It could be, your rookie looks good, and that
Yeah.
could be a building block. It could be you hired a good coach. It could be that you acquired additional assets to make a move for a better player in the future. Well, the Bulls don't have any of this. They really just don't seem to be interested in building towards a championship at all. And especially with Patrick Williams stagnating to start this year, I would say that just what are we doing here? Like they're just not attempting to forget championship or bust. They're not even trying to like approach a championship. They're really just crossing their fingers hard for the 6th seed or the 7th seed or the 8th seed in the East. That would make Jerry's heart swell because he just wants to, finish in second in the division, I guess, every year to keep the fans on the hook. And this is the curse of Chicago sports, and it won't get better until the big man dies. So, what it is.
Unfortunately for the Bulls, like you do have his his son seems to have his tentacles around the team too, whereas the White Sox there is some question of what'll happen. In the
Yeah.
year 2095 when Jerry finally departs from us. Um, but yeah, it is interesting where like even team by team around the NBA, like I kind of got pulled back in. I mean, the Butler trade, other than listening to your podcast, I kind of like stopped following the team because it was just so miserable for a while. The Jimmy Butler trade hit. I was like about to get married. It was like the day before my wife was like in the salon doing her test like hair and makeup thing, and I was just sitting out in the parking lot like, and I was like, they traded what? They didn't even keep their first round pick. I was like going nuts. So um, fortunately, I had the wedding to distract me after that. But the league has gotten so interesting. Like, there's so many interesting teams. Like, as opposed to, I feel like there was some of those like Lakers championship years in the early 2000s where it was just like, oh god, like all right, this is pretty preordained. Or even like a team like Cleveland, where it's like, I wouldn't, I wouldn't predict them to win it all, but if like Evan Mobley hits his ceiling, like there's like an out where they could surprise everybody and go really deep. I feel like, for instance, that's like how it would happen or how it could happen.
Sure.
The Bulls don't. You're right. Don't even seem to like set themselves up for that sort of exposure. And I guess like Pat Williams, the first 5 games, like it's like Pat Williams was kind of one of the few variables that had some sort of untapped potential. And I never do this. I literally made like a pros and cons list, and I'm trying to keep it really broad. because like he feels very much like a Rorschach test where it's like, okay, he is still super young. This is on the pro side, super young, and he didn't play his whole second year because Mitchell Robinson's a goon. Um, Two, he's a 3-and-D wing. Everybody's screaming at the team to get a 3-and-D wing all the time. They don't have any 3-and-D wings. This season notwithstanding, he's an accurate shooter. Doesn't shoot enough. Accurate shooter, can defend a lot of multiple positions. So it's like, so far I'm like, how do you, like how do you complain about that, right? Like it's 3-and-D wing, young, and then it's like he's about to get expensive because you already mucked around for 3-4 years. He's always needed a ton of reps, and you put him on a team with DeMar DeRozan, which like in and of itself that means he's almost certainly never going to get many shots, I don't think. And like you put him with those big three in particular, he's not going to get any shots. Seems like he's getting worse like this year, which is weird. And he doesn't rebound, which is also weird. I wonder if that ties in with like Billy's like, okay, we'll have a good defense. We're not going to crash the offensive glass at all, but we won't get burned in transition. Maybe that's part of the choice. And then the fourth part, because I remember, I think you quoted this stat years ago, and it stuck with me, which was that on that Florida State team that Pat Williams was drafted from was Devin Vassell. And if I'm not messing that up, and I think you said something like in Devin Vassell's draft year, in like a third of the possessions where opponents ran a pick and roll against Devin Vassell, it ended in a turnover. It was some like insane stat where Vassell was this like defensive monster. And I'm like, you looked at this Florida State team and you didn't even take the best 3-and-D wing in that draft. So on his own team. So I know the discourse around him gets exhausting. I, I guess to end in a question, because I don't want to just not do that, is like, what do you even do with him at this point?
Yeah. Man, yeah. It's a lot on both sides. I'll say that like it does feel like we've been through this before with Lauri Markkanen, with Wendell Carter. And both those guys are thriving now. Markkanen was an all-star last year. Wendell Carter looks better in Orlando than he ever did in Chicago. No surprise. You go from the worst coach in the NBA, Jim Boylan, to, a relatively stable organization, I guess, in the Magic. It's a low bar to clear, but, the Bulls set themselves up at rock bottom for some reason. I just worry that we're doing the same thing again with Carter and Markkanen to Patrick Williams. Now, Pat Will. I got to say, I've always thought that, he was someone who needed a lot of development when they drafted him. He was a raw prospect. And when have the Bulls ever developed a prospect? The only player it's really happened to is Jimmy Butler, and that was through the immaculate will of Jimmy more than anything the Bulls ever did. And especially when they decided to put Vucevic and DeRozan on the team with Lonzo, it was like, he was always going to be the fifth option whenever those guys were on the floor. And that has remained true into his fourth year. So I still think that, while he's objectively had a horrible start to the year offensively, he's still the sort of player you need on good teams. I mean, he's guarding Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in the opener. He's guarded Jason Tatum and, Kevin Durant and LeBron James in the past. And you just need guys who are like him. Obviously, you need to get something out of him offensively. And the role that the Bulls need their four to play with this team is just a high volume shooter. Well, to me, that's like the weakest part of Pat's skill set. Even if he can be an accurate shooter, he just doesn't really have the confidence to be a high volume shooter. And his issues are so much deeper than confidence. And, it's the first thing everyone always starts with. But I would just look at like, how can they get Patrick Williams involved in more actions? One thing I would love to see is him as a roll man. Just like let him set a screen and roll to the basket. I think that could be one way to like get him on the move and to sort of mitigate his dribbling, because his dribbling is like still a little shaky. He really struggles to get all the way to the rim off the bounce. I've long thought that he isn't really a great athlete because he's not an explosive one-footed leaper. When you're attacking the basket off the bounce, you usually don't have time to load up off 2 feet and take a big jump to the basket. You can do that, though, when you're in the dunker spot or when you're a roll man. And when he gets more time to load up, he can have some big dunks and some big above the play rims defensively too. I'm thinking back to his block on DeAndre Ayton,
Mhm.
maybe in that second. I think that was in his second year. That was mostly cut short by the injury. Just like an incredible blocked alley oop on one of the biggest, strongest centers in the league. So I definitely think there's more to work with Pat. I'm not the person making memes that says, Patrick Williams learned to speak Chinese. And I still think, despite this horrible start, I would totally re-sign Patrick Williams. Yeah, like why not?
Yeah.
First of all, he's not going to be that expensive anymore because, as Jabari Parker once said, you don't get paid to play defense. You get paid by points per game. And dear Lord, Patrick Williams cannot accumulate the coveted points per game stat in the NBA. 10 points a game, basically every year of his career. Crossing your fingers headed into this season, like, what's a reasonable expectation that's still improvement? 13 and a half points per game? When 15 seems like too many, you're in a bad spot. But he's at like 5 this year. He's at two of the 5 games he hasn't scored.
Yeah.
So
Yeah,
it's
and
like,
he's
what
been
can he
shooting like
do?
only threes. It feels like in those games where it's like he scores 0, it's like he's 0 for 6 from the field, like 0 for 5 from 3, and like that's the game. And
Yeah. And
um,
it's too
yeah,
bad for the Bulls because like the long-term hopes of the franchise rested on him becoming an offensive star. He's not going to be an offensive star.
yeah,
If he could become an average scorer for a starting power forward, that would be a huge win at this point. But I still think he's a good player. He's a good defensive player. He's just like the type of guy you need on the team. You could serve multiple roles. I think defensively, you could either have him as a wing stopper, as sort of like a low man who's giving you some supplemental rim protection. I don't know why he doesn't rebound, but the Bulls' defensive rebounding stats are usually pretty good. So like maybe he's boxing out, maybe he's doing something out
yeah.
there.
I don't know if there's
Uh,
like a good boxing out metric. That's like something I don't really know about, but like how often you prevent your mark from getting a rebound or something. I don't know if that exists, but yeah, it's some of that I was wondering about, like scheme, where like I said, like the team doesn't really the team seem to prioritize transition defense over offensive rebounding versus, so that's some of it maybe. And like, okay, yeah, you all box out and then Vooch hoovers everything up. Like maybe that's the plan and he's executing the plan, but it's strange. I mean, he gets a decent amount of steals, I feel like, off the top of my head. I guess that's probably something I could look up instead of conjecture. Um, yeah, it's frustrating. I was kind of glad I went through my ups and downs with like Kobe similarly, where it's like, okay, you draft all these super young guys who need time, and you sit through their first couple of years where they're terrible and they're trying to figure out the league, and then you dump them, and then Laurie's an all-star and Wendell is good, and it's like, you don't want to overcorrect in the other direction, but like Kobe did finally start to, he's not the most instinctive player in the world, but he just through time and effort has started to shore up the weaknesses in his game. And it's like, cool, he's not like a star guard like you take in the top 10, you cross your fingers, you hope he's like a real flamethrower, but he's a good I think he's a solid rotation player now, which if you'd asked me 2 years ago, I'd be like, this guy's will never ever be decent enough at the non-shooting stuff to be viable. And I was wrong. And I'm happy to be wrong. So you don't want to like cut yourself off. So like that's part of maybe like Pat is a microcosm because like I normally there's been 2 episodes previously. I kind of saved the like positive hot take, negative hot take for the end. But this dovetails with my sort of positive hot take that I don't feel super strongly about. Maybe that's why it's a hot take. But so under Acme, with the few draft picks they've had, I feel like they go for, the theory is they seem to go for tools goof wings with like long wingspans, like guard multiple positions, who don't know how to play offense. And the hope is that you'll coach them up. And I kind of like, for where they were, on the one hand, it's like, well, that's a way to get some upside right on these picks, like, because if somebody can defend, then you've got your like floors kind of set. And then it's like, well, if Julian Phillips is a knockdown 3-point shooter from the corners or whatever, then hey, how different is he from OG Anunoby? And it's like, well, yeah, okay, like I see at least there's like a path to it work. Like if you describe your plan, it's like, well, if you're right, it could work. Um, as opposed to some plans where I'm like, if you're right, it's still going to be bad. That's like the sort
Nick
of
Madrigal plan.
um. Oh man,
But
we could do a whole other like 5 hours on the White Sox. The well, it's the like all our money goes to middle relievers plan. I feel is the other one with the White Sox that comes to mind. Um, so like, I thought that wasn't the worst idea. The problem is it's like in the context of what you seem to be trying to do with the roster otherwise, where it's like this is a win now team. It's like you're doing a crappier version of like the Warriors failed to timeline system, where you're like, oh, we have our high upside guys. Where if Dalen Terry ever figures out how to play offense, like, oh, hey, cool, now we have this big two-way player. And like I said about Julian Phillips, or if Pat ever is like an average offensive player, and all of a sudden with these, especially with like Io and Phillips and Dalen, like these are lower picks. These aren't the number 4 overall pick. Like, oh, maybe you get more upside out of it that way. And you say, well, if we just want mid-level rotation players, you just sign those like cheaply. And that's my philosophy. I guess the problem too is like the stars aren't good enough. But I don't know. Do you think to for that theory to work, the other part is the development angle, which you mentioned they don't ever seem to do. They finally hired a shooting coach, but very Reinsdorfian is like, that behind the scenes everything's being done as cheaply and badly as possible with minimal staffing. Is that still true of the Bulls, like in terms of their
yes,
coaching infrastructure, their
yes,
tape, their
scouting.
analytics? Yeah,
Yeah,
it's all
no, hundred
still.
percent. Yeah, yeah. Why would you draft developmental prospects when you've never developed anyone and you won't invest enough to even give yourself a chance to develop them? It's like Reinsdorf views development as like purely luck based. Like, hey, we drafted Jimmy Butler. We got lucky. He turned out to be a total psycho who wants to rip everyone's head off and then shove it back down their throat. And this guy ended up being good. So, maybe Dalen Terry can be good. Maybe Julian Phillips can be good. But I somewhat agree with you that in a league that over indexes on shooting, maybe the market inefficiency is fading shooting, trying to find more versatile players and teaching the guys how to shoot. Sure. Kind of makes sense. I can
Yeah,
buy
right.
it.
Yeah.
They can't teach anyone how to shoot. It's not improved. They don't have the investment throughout the rest of the organization. So I think that Arturas Karnisovas is horrible in the draft. And that's one thing that really worries me about them, trying to tear it down. If they go full Wizards mode and just trade Vooch and DeMar and Levine, I don't think they want to do that. But if they were to do that, all right, then you really got to hit your draft picks because you're just burning season after season after season just for some lottery balls. And the best case scenario is you get the first pick in a year where even the league's biggest buffoons wouldn't screw it up. And that would be like Wemby or like Zion, just these total no-brainer guys. But most of the time you're not getting that prospect. You're getting that prospect, Wemby is once ever in the history of humanity. And even with someone like Zion, it's like maybe once every 10 years. And like, look how that's panned out so far. He hasn't been durable enough to be a good player.
Which might be tied to what makes him special too, is like being that explosive and that big. It's like
Sure.
not, it might not even just be like bad luck, so to speak.
He's looking good this year, though. And
No.
I got a $5 Zion MVP ticket at like 50-1 this year. We'll see if that one hits. I'm sure it
Oh
won't. But
man,
at least
nice.
he has MVP upside, I think, if he were to play the best version of his game and somehow stay healthy. But yeah, I have no faith in the Bulls' ability to draft or develop. I think what really sucks about it is it just seems like Karnisovas has never learned anything through his 4 picks. So he's taken Pat Will, he's taken Io, he's taken Dalen, and he's taken Julian Phillips. And all those guys, like you said, are very much in a similar mold of versatile, long, rangy players who can't dribble, pass, or shoot. And it's like, okay, none of them have been good. Why are we still doing this? Can we maybe draft a guy who would fit what the team needs? And what's tough is if you look at Dalen just seems horrible. I can't believe
Yeah.
they even picked up his option. But go through that draft, and after Dalen was drafted, you got a lot of good players. Christian Brown played a winning
Yep.
role on the championship Nuggets. the big one they missed was Walker Kessler, who's already like a monster rim protector for Utah. You draft him, you can tell Vooch to, find a new team and save yourself the contract extension there. So even I think Marjan Beauchamp looks pretty good for the Bucks, but the Bucks they're a whole nother disaster going on in Milwaukee right now under Adrian Griffin at the start of
Dude,
this.
don't hire abusers as coaches, man. Like you think Portland tried it anyway. Sorry, I don't mean to drag you into an incendiary conversation. I don't know the details. I know he was accused of something, but and Terry Stotts quit. So I don't know. It just seems like the vibes are bad. I'll put it that way.
That's putting it kindly, yeah. So, yeah, I just think Arturas, he aims low. He doesn't really know ball, and he just like he doesn't work that hard. I don't think. Like this has been the same roster pretty much kept together for the last few years, and his big thing
Continuity.
is, continuity will carry us through the day. It's like, well, dude, you had that last year and it didn't work out, so why are you doing it again this year? I want to
Yeah.
be optimistic about this year. I want to be like, I'm going to the game tonight. They're playing the Nets as we record this podcast, so I'm sure by the time it comes out, this will be a long time ago. And I'm excited to watch the team. I'm excited to go to the game. I haven't been to a Bulls game in a couple of years because I was living outside of Chicago for the first time in my life last year for just 1 year. And I'm excited to get in the building and, just like being back in Chicago this year and walking around the city. Seen a ton of Bulls hats,
Yeah.
shirts,
Okay.
jackets. And the Bulls could own this town, man. I mean, anyone could if you were good, because Chicago loves its sports teams and they all suck because they all have bad owners. But it's just like, this should be a great organization, and instead it's owned by Jerry Reinsdorf, so it's automatically a terrible organization. And I just don't see how that really changes unless they get really lucky through drafting a guy who turns out to be as good as Jimmy Butler, or they just hit the lottery 1 year, or they hire a great coach. There's a lot of ways they could get lucky, but
Yeah.
it's not happening
And
right now, it seems like.
and it's frustrating because Reinsdorf is cheap, but then this is the weird paradox of Jerry where like the cheapest way to get good is you spend on like really good coaches and infrastructure because that's cheaper than like, you take instead of signing some, you know, $10 million journeyman guy to be mediocre, you put all that into coaching and infrastructure, and you can get like way more than that $10 million if you do turn Julian Phillips into a rotation player, or you do, draft, identify prospects better. But like his cheapness is incoherent in that way. Like he's like, well, no, I don't want to spend on that either. Like I'll rather sign the $10 million mediocre player. Or sign 3 players for $3.5 million each or whatever it is. I'd rather do that, even though like it's less cost effective. And it's always been strange to me with the White Sox and the Bulls too, is like as insular as they are, you do still have people coming into the building from other organizations from time to time, whether that's players, whether it's assistant coaches, whether it's, or if it's something big, like Karnisovas came in from the Nuggets, like a different organization. And it's just weird to me, like if you walked into a building in your profession and you looked around the organization and there were like if you walked onto a construction site and you were a construction worker and nobody wore hard hats or like yellow vests, you'd be like, guys, everybody does this and there's a good reason why. Like this is the minimum. We really need to be doing this. It's weird to me that doesn't happen. It's like, guys, everybody has a shooting coach. Guys, everybody has like their own proprietary metrics. I mean, like you'd think somebody would walk in and be like, this is what I do and it works. Why aren't we doing that? And I guess that's sort of the magic of Jerry too, is that it's like, if you want to come in here and tell me that we need to wear hard hats on this construction site, like I'm not hiring you. And maybe that's the deal you cut as Karnisovas. Like, look, the deal is you will never have the resources you want. Your results are always going to suck and the fans will hate you, but you'll never get fired and you can just hang out and just do this forever. And like you said, you don't even have to do much work. Well, like 4 transactions a year for a basketball roster. I mean, that's pretty cushy. So maybe that's
Doesn't
it.
talk to the media. Doesn't talk to the media either. Make Billy Donovan the face and the speaker of the organization.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Uh, do you have a positive or negative hot take you wanted to throw out there that if you need to repurpose one from the past, that's okay too.
But when you asked me that, I wasn't sure if we were doing Bulls specific or if this was going to be more NBA in general. So I got an NBA hot take.
That's fine, man. We don't need to. I'm sure. A part of why I started this show is I didn't want to just talk about the White Sox because it's depressing. So
Right.
please let's broaden our horizons here.
NBA lottery rigged. Always have believed it's rigged. I think that's just a no-brainer. Like Wembenyama going to the Spurs was just like written in the stars. That was such a tidy package for the league to be able to sell the big man legacy from Robinson to Duncan to Wembenyama, the international legacy. Coach Pop, perhaps the greatest of all time, getting one more, Hall of Fame talent on his way out. And I've always thought that's the case. And people will say, well, the league, wouldn't the league give their stars to the Knicks? Wouldn't the league give their stars to the Lakers or the Bulls? No, because the NBA has always been very invested in boosting the small markets. The Knicks do not have to be that good for the Knicks fans to fill that building and to make those tickets insanely expensive. The Bulls just have to be a non-embarrassment for the United Center to sell out every single night. The Bulls have led the league in attendance basically every year, besides for the Jim Boylan era. The Lakers are always going to sell out the building. What the NBA needs to have a healthy, robust league is for those smaller markets to be better. And there's just a lot of times where the way the lottery plays out, I just think it's definitely rigged. You could look at Zion going to New Orleans after the Anthony Davis trade, when the league was owning the team with when the Benson family wanted to get out. Well, they end up getting Zion. And obviously, if you're going to rig it, you can't rig it every year. You have to just rig it in select circumstances. And it makes it a lot more believable that it's not rigged when the small markets are the ones winning
Mm,
and staying afloat. So
I
I
love
guess that's
that.
my hot take. I don't know if that's a positive or a negative hot take, but it's something that I've always sort of believed. It was probably rigged for the Bulls with D Rose too, which I mean,
Hometown kid, franchise needs a boost.
we're
And then
due
there are all
again,
those.
baby. Rig
Yeah.
it again. We got no hope over here.
Is
So
there a Chicago prospect who's in the 1-1 running? I mean,
yeah,
I don't know.
Matas Buzelis from Hinsdale.
There you go.
We
Let's.
got a Lithuanian from Hinsdale as potentially a top 3 pick in this NBA draft. Though I will say he hasn't looked that good. As someone who's covered the draft for about a decade now, just in the early season games he's played, I'm like, I don't think he's going to be the first pick anymore. I mean, he'll still probably be a pretty good prospect. He's 6'10", he can handle, he can shoot. Uh, but yeah,
That's.
he's Lithuanian, so AK, it's your boy.
And he might not actually be that good. So there you
He might
go.
not be
I
that
mean,
good.
um, my negative hot take was is Bulls related. Because it ties into the question I kind of wanted to ask you, even as sort of a as a farewell question. My negative hot take is I think they need to get rid of DeMar. I think they need to get rid of DeMar.
Yeah.
And obviously, last trade deadline, there was a lot of talk about that, where it's like, hey, you can trade him to some team with get 2 playoffs out of his contract instead of just one. Fits on a lot of teams, a lot of good teams theoretically. I say this saying like I love DeMar a lot. He's been so much fun. He's such an awesome guy. If you did a compilation of like best moments of the last couple of years, it would be like his game winners, the Dr. DeRozan game in the play-in. Like he, it's nice to see someone who like rises to the moment so often, is like cool under pressure. Like this, his career is this really compelling narrative. His style of play is awesome. Like love DeMar. I just don't. I think once you, the problem is with this team, or one of the many problems with this team, is they've sort of boxed themselves into a certain construction where you're like, okay, if DeMar is one of our anchors, we he's like kind of heliocentric, but not to the level you would need him to be for it to work. Like he's not Luka, he's not peak Harden. Um, his defense is like a real liability. So he's not really like setting up Levine in a way. He's not really distributing the ball, even though he can pass and he doesn't turn it over. And I just think it really makes it hard to build a team unless you're just going to overwhelm people with in other ways, right? Like if you're going to be this cheap mom and pop organization that has their draft pick every other year and you need to draft these tools goofs and hope they develop, like I just it feels like not all of these things can be true at once. And I think that's part of what we're feeling. Now, granted, when Lonzo was here, it the team looked great. It had they still, Giannis still stuffed him in the trash, but like he stuffed everybody in the trash. So it's like, that can't be the only way you judge a team. Like they were good with Lonzo. And so to that end, I was like, I didn't want to put Acme in the category of like the Rick Hahn White Sox or the Ryan Poles, Ryan Pace Bears, because I was like, he has shown some ability to like scout players who are already in the NBA. He overpays for all of them. But
Besides for
like
Caruso.
he overpays for all of them, but like at least when he went out, and I don't know how they fit together. I don't know if he can do any of this stuff. I don't know if he can develop. I don't know if he can like identify talent. I don't know if he works hard, whatever it is. But it's like if you just said pick current NBA players who are at least good at basketball, he was able to do that. Like Lonzo was good, Caruso's good, DeMar is good, like Vooch is good at basketball. Like they have flaws, they don't fit together well. This was the ceiling, the net result. You overpaid way too much, but like he wasn't doing the Rick Hahn thing where it's like not only trading for Tana Tatis, but I think James Shields is good. And James Shields, like, not only is he bad, he's like the worst pitcher in the majors. Like he can't, like Hahn was all the way over there. My standards should be better than Rick Hahn, but like I just it kills me to say it. Like that's where I feel like all roads lead back to. I think inevitably they'll dump Levine. I think you need to keep the team at a certain level of competence because I think these franchises that hit escape velocity on how sucky they are when they tank, it makes it really hard to turn the boat around. Like you look where the Pistons and Rockets have been, where they realize like, oh shoot, we actually need to go sign Fred VanVleet because we can't just have all prospects just like goofing around in a gym. Because like you said, Laurie and Wendell, they couldn't develop. The team was too crappy for them to develop. So that all goes back to like, okay, you get a call from Michael Reinsdorf tomorrow, Ricky, and he says, I'm going to give you a top half to top quarter of the league budget. Acme is gone. You are the president of basketball operations starting tomorrow. How are you fixing this team? What are you doing?
Yeah. I kind of think, last year when people were calling for the Bulls to fully blow up the team and fully break it up, I didn't really want them to do that because the team was still relatively new. I would say that we didn't totally know the extent of Lonzo's injury. And, maybe there was still, just because of lack of data, some more upside on Io DeSumo and Patrick Williams. At this point, I do feel pretty confident that this year is just a waste of time. They're not building towards anything. They're really playing for nothing. And I will maintain that, like, if they do end up winning 46 games, somewhere around there, that I'll have fun and I'll drink the Kool-Aid. And as someone who does a Bulls podcast, I'm like, hey, this is like, if they tank and I'm watching every game and they're winning 15 games a year, that would suck. So, I've certainly been around long enough to see the tank go bust. So they're not going to tank, at least pivot in some way. Try to get some other veteran stars. Try to get a different coach. I guess the first thing I would do is I would fire Billy Donovan and I would
Really? Okay.
hire Mike Budenholzer. Budenholzer is just an elite coach, just sitting there on the sidelines. No one wants him. So that would be the first thing I would do. That seems obvious to me, is get Coach Bud. I do think Zach LaVine is quiet quitting on the team a little bit, just based on his shot selection. And like, I like Zach LaVine. I think he's really good. I think if he were to go to a team like Philly and play off Joel Embiid, he'd probably look awesome. I think he's a very good shooter, a great driver. Certainly has a lot of flaws. He does not make good decisions with the basketball, which is tough when you're a guard. And in this era, every guard becomes a point guard, or they sort of should be because of just how the game's played these days. And Zach is not that. He's very much like a throwback classic shooting guard, where he plays more like, Reggie Miller than James Harden. But, he hasn't really wanted to take that role on fully. And part of the reason is because he's been the best player on the team. And even when you get DeRozan and DeRozan's been good, like they're still like relatively similar in terms of how good they are. So what would I do? All right, I'm firing Billy Donovan. Yeah, I think that this team needs to be broken up. So whether or not you're targeting picks or, you know, uh, either younger players or different veterans, either way, I think you got to do it. So yeah, I would trade Levine. I would try to get that Clippers 2028 unprotected pick, with the Clippers being, the official team of the geriatric millennials. They probably won't be very good in 2028, right? And they don't control any of their draft picks the rest of the decade until 2030. So I would try to get that pick from Philly. I'd try to get Philly's 2030 pick, and I would just try to get some more bites at the apple down the road. In terms of, DeMar, I think DeMar has to go if everyone else is staying.
Hmm.
But I don't know. Like, what's the market for DeMar even going to look like? Does he even want to stay? What could you even get anything for him? To me, that's all sort of up in the air. I'd certainly, I guess, try to move off Vooch. I think Vooch, that already looks like a terrible contract. 3 years, $60 million for Vooch. And I guess maybe my positive hot take here is I would re-sign Patrick Williams. Why
Hmm.
not? I think like every team needs guys like him. So yeah, I mean, I would love to the Bulls, avoid the tank, especially this particular draft class and next draft class. I think look really weak. Besides for like maybe the top guy, the 25 draft will have Cooper Flagg, who is a total stud, and definitely to me, he's a high school, just started a senior year of high school, but he looks like a future All NBA guy to me, no doubt. I mean, I think he's a monster. But is it really smart to tank for a one-player draft? Probably not.
And when you don't have, do they not? They don't have their pick that year as it stands. I guess you could trade
Well,
for one.
it's
I think.
top 8 protected,
Oh,
so they
okay,
will
okay,
have it.
okay. Because that's a
Uh,
DeRozan trade, I think.
that's the DeRozan trade. DeRozan
Yeah.
was a free agent. Why are we trading a top 8 protected pick for DeRozan when he's a free agent? It's like, come on,
Yeah.
Arturis. But yeah, I mean, the Bulls have put themselves in a really tough spot. And I almost think they just have to take their medicine. And like, what you want is a team that could, like, I'm not saying they have to win the championship, but like be an upper echelon Eastern Conference contender. And how do you do that? Like, you have to draft and develop good players, and you need to make smart free agent signings. And, maybe there's some young players from other rosters you can get. Try to take a flyer on someone like Paul Reed or Jaden Springer from the Sixers. Those aren't like great prospects at this point, but maybe there's still some untapped upside there after being trapped in the Doc Rivers doghouse the last few
Oh,
years in Philadelphia. So, yeah, I would say the Bulls are in a position where there's no easy answers,
yeah.
and they need better top end talent for sure. That's the biggest thing. It's been 3 years, and Levine, Vucevic, and DeRozan are just not good enough to lead the franchise. Like, when those guys play together, the team loses their minutes, and that's not a good sign. And they're all old, and they're not improving, and they don't seem to have the cohesion part of it improving either. So, yeah,
Yeah.
man, what would I do? I don't know. They're in a tough spot, and I don't like the idea of totally tearing it down, but they need to get some more future bites at the apple. Maybe try to trade for Kyle Kuzma without investing any more assets. Like, just like give me some new guys to watch.
Change would be
And
nice, even just for the novelty of it at a certain point. But
I would really just try to change Patrick Williams' offensive role too, and see if you could get more production out of a role change. Because that's really what happened to Markkanen. Like, his role changed so much, and then he really took off. But like, God, the Bulls have just made the wrong decision at every point, right? And they
yeah,
chose wrong in getting rid of Markkanen. They traded Markkanen for Derek Jones.
and
I
that
mean,
pick that they're never gonna get.
in a lottery protected draft pick from a team that's openly tanking for the next decade. So in the Blazers. So yeah, they're never getting that one. They literally traded him for Derek Jones. That's crazy. That's got to
Yeah,
be one of the worst NBA trades ever.
the
At
only
least of the last 10 years.
the only
If he
comfort I take
maintains.
is that he didn't break out with Cleveland. That's the only comfort I
Right.
take from that. Is that like one other organization? I mean, they got Donovan Mitchell for him, so like they got something. They traded him like he was valuable. And I'm just saying, like, at the least he didn't immediately become an all-star in Cleveland. So it's like someone else
Yeah.
had trouble implementing him too. But yeah,
Totally.
I hear you. It's like that's such an awful swap. Um,
Yeah.
I,
And
I
so, yeah, they're just in a tough spot, man. I don't know. Like, I look at this thing and I'm like, where's the hope? And again, like, I don't need a championship, but can we, like, at least tell ourselves they made progress towards perhaps one day winning the championship? I just want progress.
yeah,
And
because
I
like
feel the same way about the Bears. I'm like, as a Bears fan, I'm like, this wasn't going to be our year. Can we inch closer where the following season can be? And instead, they've made no progress. It's like we can't really bank on anything with the Bears. With the Bulls, where's their building block? Where is their foundation they're laying for future hope? There isn't
Yeah,
any.
I like it because if the Bulls and Pacers both finish the end of this year at like 41 wins, you feel way better as a Pacers fan than you do as a Bulls fan. Even if it's
Totally.
like the same season, it's like, no, we've got Halliburton, Mathurin, we got like all these guys on the up and up. And it's like you guys traded all your picks to build this ancient team. Like Pat and Kobe are the only players under the age of like 26 on this team. I do like the idea if you're going to trade fire Billy. I like the idea of Coach Bud because like Billy's weird where he's like good enough that you have a decent chance of hiring a worse coach, especially this organization. Um, the thing with trading DeMar is like if we're breaking it up. I mean, look, you should have done it last offseason if you were going to do it because he's expiring at this point. Is like, I think you'd probably you trade Levine because he brings you the most back, and he's had enough losing for a lifetime. I think you trade DeMar because he's so ball dominant. I'd kind of keep Vooch because like you're already stuck with him. His trade value is probably almost nothing. He's kind of a
Yeah.
connective piece. Like he doesn't need the ball. And like I would say like, all right, we're extending Pat, and depending on what you get back for those guys, Pat, go take like 25 shots a game until we figure out what the next thing is. And he's not because like if you keep DeMar, like that's not happening. And if you say, hey Pat, like, dude, don't even worry about it. Like we already extended you. If you miss a million shots, if you look like, who cares? Like we're not trying to win this year. We're invested in you. Let's do it. If that's the way you want to go. So that's kind of my thinking with DeMar. Like even though it's like those those Boylan teams were. Here's what I will say because I know that we're coming up on the end of the time. Is if we do go back into the tanking, my heart breaks for you and your co-anchor Jason. However, like the cash considerations episodes during the height of the Jim Boylan, and they're all good. I always listen. I always enjoy it. But like tanking bulls, the cash, I feel sorry for you two, but it's tremendous content because like it was hysterical. Like periodically I go back and listen to even like I think it's cash considerations like 9, 10, and 11 or something when like Boylan first came in and had the punch clock and was doing the push-ups or whatever. And it's extremely funny. Don't play it for your children. I don't think it's suitable for work, but it is extremely funny. So we're winding down, and I don't know if you had any closing remarks or thoughts other than me extending my gratitude. Or I think everybody listening already probably knows your socials, but feel free to throw those out there too.
Yeah, I don't got much else. I would say listen to Cash Considerations if you want our weekly Bulls podcast. All my other work is at SBNation.com. And yeah, thanks for having me, man.
Dude, pleasure was all mine. Thanks so much.